This is Doc Higginmeister's Writing Project. We're finding the reasons for writing. This is episode 9. Today we're going to continue to talk about perspectives in writing, so we'll call this part 2. Last time, if you remember, we talked about first-person perspective. Now remember, when you're writing a story, the angle that you tell the story from is kind of the perspective. First person deals with, like with a movie, one camera. You tell the entire story from one person's perspective. Now, usually that is told as if you were that person. I saw this, or I went and did that, and then this happened to me. And so it's like the camera's inside your own head, and you're looking at everything else from that one camera. Now, we talked about that sometimes makes it so you can't jump to action that's happening where that one person can't be. And so sometimes that's a problem. So if you've got a story that needs to be told from more than one camera, like a movie, you could do it from third person perspective. Now, what is third person perspective? Third person perspective is like having an invisible person who's watching all the action. And so he has the power to tell you what's happening, although he's not in the story usually. He's there. And he's invisible, and he sees the people talking, and he sees the action, and he just calls the action. Kind of like on the radio, someone watching a football game, they're explaining what's happening, and they're calling the action, but they're not in the game. That's third person perspective. Now, it can be really helpful when you have to jump from one place to another place. I don't know if you remember, but last time we talked about me being in the store fighting that monster, and how if I'm describing it as a first person perspective, it's me shooting the monster. I can't jump over to the car where my wife is driving toward the store. Well, if I'm going to do it in third person, I can be talking about Doc Higginmeister shooting at the monster, and he's doing that, and then there's this battle, and his wife is in the car driving over to the parking lot of the store, and she's getting out of her car, and she's walking slowly to the doors, and she opens the doors just as the monster is crawling over the meat counters and starts to throw slabs of meat at Doc Higginmeister. And then the monster looks over and sees Doc Higginmeister's wife. You see how that allowed me to jump over to her action, even though Doc Higginmeister didn't know until that moment that I just described that she was even there. And now we've got a whole thing, because I, as the invisible narrator, I can see what Doc Higginmeister's doing. I can see what the monster's doing. I can see what Doc Higginmeister's wife is doing. And so it gives me flexibility to look at it from any angle, almost as if I had cameras anywhere I want cameras. Okay, so it can be helpful. And so third person is going to be a lot of saying, he did this, she did that, they did this, they said this, they felt this, instead of the I and the me, which is the first person. Okay, so these are the two choices you get to make. How do you want the story to sound? How many angles do you want to be able to tell the story from? Some stories don't need a whole bunch of angles because there's not a whole lot of action. Most of the interesting stuff is inside the head of the person who's telling it. Well, maybe first person's perfect for that. But if there's a lot of jumps and a lot of story and a lot of characters and a lot of adventure, and there's parts of the story where that main character isn't going to be, well, you probably want to do third person. You kind of got to make that choice before you start writing, because it really sounds bad if you jump from one to the other to the one to the other and you're constantly switching. It kind of makes it hard to read and a little bit confusing. So we don't want to confuse our reader, because our reader is doing us a favor by reading our stuff. And so we want to try and make it all the same. Okay? So third person simply is an invisible person in the story action who's calling all the action. Now, another thing that third person narrator, and that's the word we use for it sometimes, is the narrator, can do is they can sometimes go inside the head of a character. And I don't mean in like a surgery. I mean inside the head, the thoughts. And they can tell what a person is thinking, because it's almost like that invisible narrator has the power to read their minds, if it helps the story. And so he could explain the shock and the feelings and the thoughts and the words that Doc Higginmeister's wife thinks, doesn't say, but thinks as she comes into the store and sees all of the craziness. Maybe that would help the story, but maybe it wouldn't. The narrator could also just explain what her face expression looks like: shock, fear, worry, panic, whatever it is. You could even describe her body motions and language, or maybe she drops I don't know, her purse that she was carrying because she's so shocked she drops the purse. All of those little actions, when you describe those little actions, it will let the reader know, oh wow, she's shocked. You didn't have to say she was shocked. You didn't have to go inside her mind and said, oh, I'm shocked. Not that you would think it like that. You simply show what they're thinking by showing what they're doing. Okay? And so that can be a better way to do it. But you have all of these choices in third person. Okay? So there's a lot of choices. That's why lots of stories are written this way. Okay. So that gives you a flavor for what you can do, what you can't do. But there's another thing you need to remember. When you're writing and you're narrating the action, you want to be careful not to forget that your narrator's telling the story and your narrator's there and you're imagining it from the narrator's perspective, but your narrator isn't supposed to have an opinion about stuff. Don't let your narrator step into the action and say, well, Doc Higginmeister made a bad shot with his laser blaster, and he really should have practiced some more. And he was kind of acting a little weird, and, he should have been more careful and looked out for this. See, all of those things are like opinions. The narrator shouldn't have opinions. Characters can have opinions, but remember, narrator is not a character. Narrator's just calling the action and putting things together and explaining things and jumping from place to place. Okay, so don't give the narrator opinion, and that's easy to do because you're sitting in the narrator's seat and you're seeing the story from their perspective. And sometimes you're going to have an opinion as the writer. You're going to kind of have an opinion. You're going to slip that in because it sounds like a good opinion. But remember, you're the narrator, and you don't get to have an opinion. Only the characters do. Okay, enough of that. Whatever perspective you choose for your story, make sure that you have fun.